All right, next up we have Druid and Shiro, who has joined us for the review. First card is Cenarian Ward. An 8-cost spell, gain 8 armor, summon a random 8-cost minion. 8 is a very powerful mana cost for random minions, at least historically has been. There are, some very weak ones, but in general, you actually get a pretty decent deal for most 8-cost minions. A lot of them have a lot of power in their effect, like a Tyrion or something, less likely for Battle Cry. That said, a random minion for 8, when you can just pay 8 and play a specific minion, you're only really getting the 8 armor out of this, and 8 armor is pretty valuable, but there isn't like stuff like the Spellstone that really gives Druid the ability to really heavily leverage armor in the current standard metagame. So this is, a little bit less appealing than it might be if there were more armor style synergies. This can be really powerful with some of, like, say, the Eclipse cards, right? There's the Eclipse, which doubles your next spell. Obviously, doubling a really powerful spell like Cenarian Ward, building yourself a board presence as well as gaining a bunch of armor can be extremely strong. So maybe that's where this card sees some amount of play. It ends up, being like cost reduction at double cost into Cenarian Ward or whatever that enables you to get more value out of like an individual big spell. I don't think this will really see play like by itself. I doubt that there'll be decks that just kind of play Cenarian Ward because it's a good card. But with, say, spell cost reduction effects, obviously you can pick it off like Nature Studies or something in a lot of games, and even if you don't put it in your deck, can end up seeing play. Overall, this feels like it's a fairly niche card for specific spell-focused Druid decks. Next up, we have Faire Arborist. Choose one, draw a card, or summon a 2/2 Treant with Corrupt. Do both. This is, I think, okay. Maybe you're playing a token-style Druid deck, and this is effectively a pair of 2/2s for 3, which is okay. Or, maybe you decide, well, the extra 2/2 is not going to be very valuable, so you can just cycle this. 3-cost 2/2 that draws a card is actually pretty decent. And then if you, corrupt it, obviously, the deal of get 2 2/2s and a card is pretty solid. But the problem is, how good is the 2/2 body that you're getting once you're past the point of having played a card to upgrade this into the corrupted version? So it's not entirely clear this is like likely to see really that much play to me for largely that reason. Like, a 2/2 body is not super valuable after the early turns of the game for the most part. And I like, unless you're playing a deck that's like really token focused, and even then, like, maybe you very likely have like just better token generator style cards that you can lean on. But even in those instances, like, a lot of those decks do want something that enables them to, like, not just run out of gas. And having one of your cards be both a token generator and something that can replace itself later on can have some amount of value. So I doubt this is going to be like an omnipresent Druid card, but I could see it definitely seeing play in token decks if there's enough support for those. And the problem being, I don't necessarily think there is right now. Next up, we have Fizzy Elemental, a 9-cost 10/10 Rush Taunt. This is, basically Mashifin Prime, like, you didn't shuffle it in, you just got Rush Taunt, 10/10. Obviously, there's a lot of ramp in Druid, but it feels like there's a lot of generally stronger payoffs than this. Maybe there's some like later point where you care about it being an elemental. Overall, I feel like you're going to need to do better than this, which is kind of crazy to think about. Like, you need to do better than like 10/10 Rush Taunt in order to actually find your way into a real deck. But yeah, you do. 9's a lot of mana. Once you get to 9, you really have to be impacting things other than just like, fighting with like a minion on the board. Maybe this goes into like strength in numbers Druid. And you end up getting it like for free, or like nearly completing your own strength in numbers off of it, and that can be pretty powerful. It is important to note, for like both the fact that Druid has mana ramp and the fact that Druid does have ways to cheat out minions like strength in numbers can be extremely strong. So maybe this goes into like a Druid deck with like the new N'Zoth, right? Maybe this is the one elemental in your N'Zoth Druid deck, so that N'Zoth is always bringing this back, and that's extremely high impact. That could be a very strong place for a card like this. But you really have to get more than just the immediate impact of this card in order for it to really, I think, justify including in your deck. Because just, a big body, yes, Rush Taunt, powerful combination, 10/10, a lot of stats. But 9's a ton of mana. Even with, Nazareth having to have already paid the 9 up front for this before you actually end up getting to the 10, is a lot to ask for that investment prior to using your Nazareth for reanimation. But the fact that it is, again, an elemental for a class that doesn't really have that many elementals, and a very high impact one to come back for free at that, could be a really big deal for that sort of strategy. Next up, we have Greybow. This is a 5-cost 4/6 with Taunt. Death Threat will give a random friendly minion Death Threat will summon Greybow. So this is a pretty interesting card, right? This is a card that really wants to be in it feels like a mid-range style deck, because you want to have a decent number of minions in play in order to actually ensure that when Greybow dies, there's another minion to get the Death Rattle effect. This is something that maybe is like a curve topper in a token druid deck. Maybe it's, something that goes into there really isn't mid-range druid these days, right? Mostly, especially with the existence of overgrowth, you're mostly going to have ramp druid or more just proactive aggro druid. Very powerful card to come off of Jandis, for instance, kind of wild. It's not a card that I think there's an obvious place for, at least right now, but it does feel like this is something that can make your token style druid decks a bit harder for your opponent to deal with, in the sense that it's itself a fairly big thing if they just try and clear your board, not necessarily everything that kills treants or whatever is going to kill the 4/6. And if someone brawls, right? If someone brawls into a Greybow on a board, well, whatever the remaining minion that survives will get the Death Rattle to resummon Greybow. So the fact that there are rather devolving missiles in basically every shaman and mage deck is a little bit of a problem for anything like this card, but that's kind of conditional on the popularity of shaman and mage, which at least since the nerfs has been to a lot of the mage cards has been at least a bit less. So we shall see what the metagame looks like, but it does feel like it can give you some staying power in decks that might otherwise run out of gas. Next up, we have Guess the Weight. 2 cost, draw a card, guess your next card costs more or less to draw it. Shiro, I'd say you weigh about 16 pounds. I'm right. He's a big guy. So I would draw an additional Shiro. Well, it's whether the card that I would draw after Shiro is more or less than 16 pounds. I would guess the average card weighs less than 16 pounds. But yeah, I mean, this is interesting. Druid had a lot of card draw. A lot of the card draw that exists in Druid is fairly expensive at this point, right? Druid doesn't have that much granular card draw. And Guess the Weight, if you're playing a ramp style deck, actually has a pretty decent chance of just being a draw 2 for 2, which is really, really powerful, right? If most of your deck is either cheap or expensive, that's where I think that Guess the Weight is a sort of card that's likely to be pretty effective. If your deck is say this ramp Nazareth druid that includes say Fizzy Elemental, you Guess the Weight, you hit a ramp card, well, probably it's going to be something that's more expensive, so good chance to get the second draw. But yeah, I think this is certainly a card that gives decks that want some amount of card draw, but can't really necessarily invest in say Fungal Fortunes, which was crazy until it got nerfed, or Overflow, but want to have a little bit of ability to accelerate themselves through their deck to find specific specific pieces, or just raw card economy. So I feel just ramp style druid deck, but that's more of a mid-range-ish ramp, again, maybe a Nazareth style druid deck could use this, and we're not just looking to load up on some combo and end up just Sarahing someone or whatnot. Next up, we have Kiri, Chosen of a Loon, which has a 4-cost 2/2 battle cry, add a solar eclipse and lunar eclipse to your hand, which we see on the right-hand side of the screen. Lunar Eclipse being 2-cost, deal 3 damage to a minion. Your next spell this turn costs 2 less. Lunar Eclipse being your next spell this turn casts twice. So I mentioned this when we were talking about Cenarian Ward. And the possibility of using specifically Solar Eclipse to copy Cenarian Ward and get, a ton of value out of the, big high cost card, generating some board presence, getting a lot of armor. Now, obviously, that is a lot of mana. You can use the Kiri, Chosen of a Loon to, get yourself the bonus copies of Solar Eclipse and Lunar Eclipse, in addition to putting them in your deck themselves. Of course, Solar Eclipse and Lunar Eclipse are just cards that you can include in your deck. So there is, the ability to chain Lunar Eclipse into Solar Eclipse into something else in order, off of the Kiri itself. So the Kiri gives you one of each of these and can enable this sort of chain spell combo kind of play style that is the idea sort of the Moonkin, the balanced druid. Shiro is giving the example of balance by balancing on my lap. Shiro Eclipse, when everything is just covered Infloof. Now that's a card. I think that there are obviously a lot of really, really powerful individual Druid spells, that perhaps you want to copy, like I mentioned, Cenarian Ward. You could maybe, try and Solar Eclipse into Lightning Bloom. I guess you hit Solar Eclipse Lightning Bloom. You have to how would you do it? I guess it's hard to actually Solar Eclipse. There's no way to Solar Eclipse Survival of the Fittest. I'm trying to figure this out. You'd have to have a Mana Saber, like 2 Mana Sabers, in order to actually do that, I believe. Because you can't actually innervate. I guess you could have nature studies, somehow, but no, you have to have nature studies that's somehow copied. You could do it with Kalthos, Solar Eclipse into nature studies, but then you have to Solar Eclipse again into your Survival of the Fittest. You basically have to, it's really tough. It's really tough. So we're mostly looking at 8 cost or less spells like Cenarian Ward that we were talking about before. Overall, I think it's a very interesting concept, right? You want to look and try and find specifically these high cost cards that work very well being doubled. Obviously, again, Cenarian Ward is one of them. Maybe you're double casting your guess the weights or whatever. I don't know, drawing from the deck, double casting. Probably not something like a Nourish or an Overflow, because those are just going to make you overdraw or just end up with a bunch of random stuff. All in all, I think it's actually a pretty sweet concept and challenge to try and figure out how to build a deck that can use these very effectively. You're going to specifically want high impact things that I actually don't know if the next spell cast twice, if the second one is random, or if it's going to target the same target if you target one. A lot of things that double cast, say the double time treasure in duels, end up doing so in a way that is random. But then some other things, end up say Electra Storm Surge target the same thing. My guess is that it probably ends up working Electra rather than double time, which obviously makes them say a swipe better, right? If you end up with a bunch of spell power, it's you can Solar Eclipse swipe someone and do a ton of damage to them. Overall, I think that Cenarian Ward feels like the best payoff for this style of deck, which obviously makes a lot of sense for it to be in the same set, but definitely a pretty open-ended thing for the future of kind of a spell-based Druid strategy. Next up, we have Moon Touched Amulet, a 3-cost spell. Give your hero +4 attack this turn. Corrupt and gain 6 armor. So this is kind of like a Feral Rage, right? But Feral Rage, which was very, very popular and pretty powerful card for a while, it was a choose one attack or armor. This is both, but you can't get the armor unless you've corrupted it. Giving your hero +4 attack feels like the one that is actually more important to have cheap, right? Because you may want to use this as removal, use it to kill your opponent's minion early on. And then later on in the game, you can get, much more impact out of a Moon Touched Amulet that sits in your hand, getting an extra armor as well. This doesn't necessarily feel like a card that I'm super stoked about. But this is, maybe this is a card that goes into your kind of spell Druid deck alongside the Eclipses and whatnot. And maybe use Moon Touched Amulet to say you double that with your Lunar Eclipse. And by the way, let's, sort of think back, we still have access to the stuff that was played in the spell Druid decks before. I mentioned Fungal Fortunes. That card was nerfed, but that deck kind of fell out of favor. Maybe there's a spell-based version of this that uses these Eclipse cards to really take advantage of all this action and uses Fungal Fortunes to dig and piece together everything that may not necessarily be immediately on people's mind, because that deck did fall out of favor in favor of the Guardian Animals versions of Druid that we've seen much more often recently. And lastly, because the Eclipse cards are actual cards, we already sort of discussed them in the context of Kiri. Umbral Owl, a 7-cost beast with Rush, costs 1 less for each spell you've cast this game. Obviously, a 7-cost 4/4 Rush is not very appealing, but a 0-cost 4/4 Rush might be. This does kind of possibly go into the sort of spell-style Druid we were just talking about. Maybe you're playing a deck that's drawing a bunch of extra spells, able to generate a lot of extra spells, maybe with Kiri itself, and you can get this reduced. Maybe this goes into... This is the beast that goes into your Nazareth Druid deck, right? Maybe you end up getting the Rush Taunt Elemental, the Rush Owl. So as the moment you play your Nazareth, you get a bunch of stuff that can immediately impact the game. It's a little bit awkward. We just talked about a Fungal Fortunes style of deck. This would definitely want to go into a Spell Druid deck, but obviously Spell Druid ends up kind of pushing you a little bit away from wanting to have too many actual minions in your deck because of the impact on the effectiveness of Fungal Fortune. Maybe this goes into you know, a Survival of the Fittest deck, right? It is a 7-cost minion, so it doesn't actually come off of Guardian Beast, but maybe if you're playing a deck that, you know, is pretty spell heavy, Guardian Animal heavy, and use Survival of the Fittest, suddenly this is like a 0-cost 8/8 rush, right? Pretty high impact there as well. But yeah, overall, you know, like this is like not a card that jumps out at me as like, okay, well, this is like amazing, but could be a role player as a decent way to claw back into the board after you spent a bunch of your mana on spells in a ramp / spell-based Druid deck. Next up, we have Hunter. First off in Hunter is Dancing Cobra, a 2-cost 1/5 beast with Corrupt Gain Poisonous. A 2-cost 1/5 beast is kind of interesting for any kind of like beast buff cards. You know, this is obviously like a pretty strong thing to possibly just like Houndmaster. That said, obviously there's no like Crackling Razor Maw right now, right? There's no really high impact way to take advantage of a very high health beast on the board, at least for, you know, a while. If you just, you know, end up playing a 3-drop and then play this as a 1/5 poisonous, that's fairly strong, you know, as a board control tool. That said, of course, like how valuable is like a slow poisonous, like higher health minion? Because you have to like play the card from your hand, right? This doesn't become corrupt after you've played it, which is one of the important things about any of these corrupt cards. They only transform while they're in your hand if you've played something after the fact. So, you know, you can't like play this on turn 2, then play a 3-drop and have it suddenly gain poisonous. Not how it works. So you know, like maybe this goes into like Highlander Hunter, you know, where like having some amount of additional like board control can be more valuable. Certainly doesn't go into like any kind of like face hunter deck, both because, well, you want your things to do a lot of damage to your opponent directly, and of course you generally have a lot of cheap things rather than a bunch of expensive things to help power this thing up. But in order to corrupt this, it's not that expensive, right? It's you literally have to play a 3-drop. And one of the things about Hunter, too, is that, like, you very frequently, in a lot of, like, mid-range style Hunter decks, want to use your hero power. So, like, playing, like, a 2-drop on turn 4 after playing a 3-drop on turn 3, if you play, like, a powered-up 2-drop, you know, say you have a 1/5 poisonous, and then use your hero power, that's actually not bad, right? And then maybe you Houndmaster this, and you get, like, you know, a 7-health poisonous taunt, which could be pretty tough for a lot of things to get through. That said, obviously, you know, every element of this card is, at that point, it would be very vulnerable to, like, any sort of silence effect. You'd, you know, obviously lose like both the Houndmaster buff and the corrupted portion that gives it poisonous. But, you know, maybe there's just enough going on there to you know, like give us the ability to play like a sort of like mid-range Hunter style build. Because even like by itself, if you do like tempo this out on 2 and have Houndmaster, that's pretty big, right? Like you're getting a 3/7 with your Houndmaster. That is difficult for a lot of aggressive decks to punch through. And like just the fact that it is like 5 health, if you are playing against you know, aggressive decks that do have like small minions, just the 1/5, right? Like the upgradable framebot or whatever it was, the mech was actually by itself like not horrible against some aggressive decks. You know, it really depends on what the aggressive decks look like and what their minions stat lines are. Next up, we have Darkmoon Tongue. I like that it's Tonk, not Tank. Tonk. 7-cost 8/5 mech. So if you do happen to get an Oblivitron, you can do something with it. Death Rattle, fire 4 missiles at random enemies that deal 2 damage each. You know, this is... It's a pretty big effect if your opponent, like, you know, say you're playing like a aggressive deck, your opponent like Wraths, right, and kills this. They take 8, right? Like if your opponent clears the board of this, they take a ton of damage. And then like maybe you're playing like, is 9 Lives even legal anymore? Eyes of Shadows, yeah, it is. Shiro's back. Shiro heard we were talking about Hunter, and he wants to come hang out with some hounds. But yeah, you know, this is a very big Death Rattle effect. Not necessarily a huge Death Rattle effect, but it's a very big Death Rattle minion, which, you know, maybe you're playing the, well, we'll get to the Nazareth callback card, the old Nazareth card. That can be really, really powerful, right? If you get like, you know, just end up with really big stuff coming off of the, what is it, Seed of Nazareth. It is a mech. There's actually some amount of cards that care about mechs, like I was mentioning, Oblivitron. Getting that into play for free off an Oblivitron can be like kind of sick. It'll also just do a ton of damage immediately. Like an OTK, you killed my board, you die style of Hunter deck could be kind of funny. I don't think this is going to go into any like existing Hunter deck, but there are some cards in this set that, you know, I think that, you know, do care about like actually just having like big things that blow up when you launch them at your opponent. Like, oh no, it's not the next one. We'll get there. We'll get there. Spoiler. Next card, alphabetically, Don't Feed the Animals, Shiro. Shiro's like, no, please feed the animals. Feed me everything, every bit of it. 2 costs, give all beasts in your hand +1/+1. Corrupt, give them +2/+2 instead. So Shiro's gotten like at least like +10/+10 over the years from being fed, because he gets every, you know, snack, every treat that he ever demands. This is an interesting card, like, you know, hand buff hunter. There are a decent number of hunter cards, like the augmented porcupine, that scale off of their stats. There's another one actually included in this set, the trampling Rhino. Maybe this ends up being like a decent card in like mid-range-ish hunter, mid-range beast style hunter, in order to, you know, buff up. Like even this with, like, you know, you say you drew Wolpertinger late, right? And you're like, okay, well, I can play Don't Feed the Animals and suddenly spend 1 and get a pair of 3/3s. In addition to buffing up, you know, trampling Rhino or any kind of other stuff. Maybe you end up playing like a Boar OTK deck, or like a Tundra Rhino OTK deck that looks to buff up your guys multiple times. Don't feed the animal, and then just sending a ton of charging beasts at your opponent's face. And next up, we have the card that I was just talking about, Jewel of N'Zoth, not Egg of N'Zoth or Heart of N'Zoth. Summon 3 friendly Death Rattle minions that died this game. An 8-cost card that relies on having big things that have already died does not feel like it's likely to be an effective hunter card to me, but I'd love to see this sort of thing work, right? This with, you know, the Tongue we were just talking about, this with like Oblivitron, right? This with just like a bunch of big stuff that ends up having like additionally powerful things happen could actually be like kind of interesting. Again, like any kind of strategy that revolves around this is going to be extremely vulnerable to transform effects like devolving missiles or polymorph, if those are popular in the metagame. Pretty unlikely this sort of deck can actually ever really find play. One of the interesting things about Jewel of N'Zoth is that there is at least one card, which is in fact the next card, which helps enable it. Maxima Blastenheimer, a 6-cost 4/4 battlecry. Summon a minion from your deck. It attacks the enemy hero, then dies. So if you have largely a bunch of big Death Rattle minions in your deck, Maxima Blastenheimer is a fantastic card to help you get them out, get their Death Rattle effects, and get them in the pool for your N'Zoth. If you Blastenheimer out a Tongue, you know, you hit your opponent for a ton of damage, then hit your opponent or their minions for more damage, and then you look to try to get it into play once again with Jewel of N'Zoth. Boom, boom, boom. You end up playing like basically just like Maxima Blastenheimer, and then like cheap spells and secrets and big Death Rattle minions. Maybe this is a deck, right? Maybe it's not a good deck, but maybe it's a deck. And yeah, it's definitely something that I'm going to experiment with, because it seems like it can win in dramatic fashion. And I'm here for that. Next, we have Mystery Winner. Not a card that goes in my Maxima Blastenheimer deck, even if I want secrets. This card just seems exceptionally good. 1 cost 1/1, Battlecry, discover a secret. One of the things that's great about secrets is that they are frequently situationally very powerful, and the ability to discover them is, you know, just that much more powerful. Because you're like, okay, I'm going to try and find whatever's best for me right now. One of the things about Hunter is that you really often care a whole lot about having access to tempo plays, right? Like you're a class that relies on killing your opponent before they're able to get their own game plan into place, or they kill you. Your hero power does not impact the board in any way. It just helps kill your opponent. So having, you know, the ability to have 1-drops that are not useless later in the game because they give you some amount of value, but are still decent plays early, can be really good. So Mystery Winner gives you 1-drop 1/1, obviously not super powerful because it doesn't have any minion types, but does give you a secret. So helps you enable any kind of secret synergy stuff, and also obviously just gives you, like, you know, a little bit of card advantage. Any kind of discover effect will only give you secrets of your own class, of course. So this will only give you Hunter secrets. So you can always play this into a turn 2 secret. So this is kind of a turn 1 and turn 2 play all rolled into one, along with effective card advantage. So just generally, I think this seems like a super strong card, and I expect to see a strong amount of play in a lot of Hunter decks. New secret. Shiro, your cage is open. You're free. You're actually not, because you're sitting on my lap and you don't seem to want to get away. So your cage might be open, but you are my animal companion, so you will not leave me. But anyway, this is a 2-cost secret. When your turn starts, if you control 2 minions, summon an animal companion. So obviously, the card we just saw, the 1-cost 1/1 that gives you a secret, that's 1 minion that you can use in order to help enable this. This is an interesting card because there's a lot of kind of different ways that you can play around your opponent's secrets. And one of the secrets that actually sees sees a decent amount of play in a lot of Hunter decks, being like Snake Trap, makes you not want to attack your opponent's minions. Like so you're like, okay, well, I'll attack your face. And if you attack your face, leave their minions in play, well, maybe Open the Cages gets triggered. Maybe you have Open the Cages and Snake Trap. So if they attack your minion, then okay, well, you killed my minion, but you activated Snake Trap, which then activates Open the Cages, and now I get, a Huffer or a Leok or whatever, and I smork you. I think this is definitely like a pretty compelling secret for a proactive Hunter deck. A lot of the secrets that you have the option to play in Hunter tend to be like things that don't actually advance your game plan. Say you have like Explosive Trap, Freezing Trap, and you're like, an aggressive deck, and you're playing against an opponent who like isn't going to trigger those, and you're like, okay, well, these just sit here doing nothing for a long time. And if you have Open the Cages, it's like, okay, well, I actually have a secret that enables me to put pressure on because my opponent didn't kill my minions, and that could be really, really good. So yeah, if you have like this plus Snake Trap plus Pack Tactics, it really puts your opponent kind of like in a bind. What do I even do? Trying to not trigger your secrets, but also not just allow you to go crazy with Open the Cages. So I think it's pretty sweet. Next up, we have Petting Zoo. I'm just going to role play right here. 3 cost, summon a 3/3 Strider, repeat for each secret you control. This is another card that's interesting in the sense that like it rewards you for your opponents not triggering your secrets. If your opponents are afraid to trigger your secrets, then okay, well, boom, Petting Zoo. This could be really, really powerful. You play like the Mystery Winner on turn 1, you play another secret in turn 2, then suddenly, boom, 2 3/3s on turn 3. It obviously reminds you a little bit of Spellstone, but Spellstone specifically just rewarded you for playing the secrets at all. This actually gives you more of a reward if your opponent isn't triggering your secrets. So it puts your opponent kind of in a weird position where like they want to play around your secrets, but also really want to trigger them so that they don't trigger Petting Zoo. So it sort of, creates all these sort of mini games within the game in order to sort of figure out like what the best play is in any given situation because of the dynamics between the secrets in this card. So obviously, it's a little bit harder to get max value out of it, but it's also a lot faster, right? If you just play a secret in turn 2 and your opponent doesn't trigger it right away, you just play Petting Zoo and you have 2 3/3s. And that's really strong. And there are even secrets that your opponent can't possibly trigger if you don't let them. Like say a Pack Tactics or a Open the Cages, right? Like if you have those and you don't play a minion, you play Pack Tactics or Open the Cages into Petting Zoo, you're guaranteed to get 2 3/3s for 3, and that is a pretty strong tempo option in any world, right? So I think this is definitely a very, very strong card, and I think that it will certainly help enable more proactive versions of Secret Hunter that have the possibility of being quite powerful. Speaking of secrets, Rinlings Rifle. 4 cost 2/2. After hero attacks, discover a secret and cast it. It does say cast it rather than put it into play. So I don't know if there's like things that actually trigger off of like casting secrets versus play. I don't know exactly. But regardless, this is obviously a very powerful weapon. Effectively giving you multiple secrets for 1 card. Obviously, like from a tempo perspective, it's a 2 cost 4 power weapon, so that's not necessarily super effective. But say you have the Petting Zoo, right? This can help enable possibly giving you attack into Petting Zoo for 3 if your opponent isn't triggering them. In fact, the discover effect, not just like a random secret, also gives you some additional like leverage over what you're actually doing in that sort of situation. So I think this is like a pretty strong card overall, and again another powerful tool for those secret style decks. And last but certainly not least in Hunter is Trampling Rhino. 5 cost 5/5 rush. After the attacks and kills a minion, excess damage hits the enemy hero. I do appreciate that literally is just named after the mechanic that does exactly this in Magic the Gathering. For those of you who don't know, there's a mechanic in Magic that has existed since the beginning of the game called Trample, which was if a minion with Trample is blocked, any excess damage is dealt to the opponent after the minion is killed. So this is literally the Magic mechanic Trample on a card called Trampling Rhino. But this is a card that I think is like pretty interesting. Obviously, the fact that it's like pseudo charge, right? If your opponent has small minions, if your opponent has like a small minion in play that they don't have a taunt, this just charges. They have a 1/1 attack. It ends up doing like 4 to your opponent's face, right? And also this is especially powerful with Don't Feed the Animals, any kind of hand buff style cards. If this gets up to like 9/9 from double Don't Feed the Animals with Corrupt, that's a 5 cost Pin Crush if it attacks and smushes a minion. I think this is a very, very strong card. Obviously just Rush giving you the ability to like fight for the board very effectively. This is like a reasonably efficient minion, 5/5 with an ability in addition to Rush 4/5. It's also a beast, so it can scale with any kind of beast stuff. I think it's just like a very, very strong card overall. You know, it can be a powerful tool in like any kind of mid-range hunter deck. It can be a powerful tool in Face Hunter even, because if your opponent is as a minion, this can represent, you know, the ability for you to punch through that and kill them. Obviously, it can be great at dealing with opposing taunts, right? Because if your opponent has like, you know, say your opponent has a Kartut, right? This like can attack through the second half of Kartut and wipe out the life gain that they get anyway. So overall, I think this is just like really, really strong. Maybe you even have Guardian Animals Hunter. You probably don't, but it is a 5-cost beast, so it could happen. But overall, you know, I feel like this is actually probably the most universally high quality hunter card that we've seen. I think this is the hunter card most likely to see the most play in the most different decks, because it's just like such a good card for what hunter wants to do, which is, you know, and is good at what hunter is often bad at, which is helping to control the board when it falls behind. So this gives you the ability to control the board and kill your opponent all in one, and that's really everything that a hunter could dream of. Isn't that right, buddy? Yeah, that's hunter.